Okay, so today is Wednesday, um, August 26th, and today we're going to talk about music fundamentals. Um, all right, part of this course, we're going to talk about all kinds of things about rock and roll and about music, and particularly rock and roll, different terms involved, and we're going to talk about form as it relates to music. And it's going to be difficult to talk about things like 12-bar blues if you don't know what a bar is, right? You don't know what blues is, and what does blues mean? Where does it come from? What makes a song blue? And it has to do with scales, and we'll get into that. So we're going to study a fair amount of music fundamentals, and again, it's not my intent to make a musician out of you, or a school musician out of you're not here for music school. But I am going to give you a cursory. You do need a cursory understanding about music, kind of like in a music appreciation class. So that's the intent. If you've had band or choir, a lot of this is going to be pretty easy for you. But for the benefit of those who have no background in music, as we start talking about music in detail later, when I start playing a song, so can you hear the flutes and sixteenths in the background and the voices, and eighths, you won't know what sixteenths and eighths are, what I'm talking about. We need a common language. So just a cursory understanding, just, a fundamental understanding of music and what we're talking about. So we can talk about what it is, discuss what we're listening to. Also important later, because you'll be given opportunities to write papers, and among them a review of a concert or performance, a live performance. And that's what I'm looking for, is you to be able to demonstrate a working knowledge of music terms. And we use a lot of them already. Like, that's not my forte. What is forte? Forte is a dynamic, right? But maybe you didn't know that. What does it really mean? That dress has nice accents. What does that mean? Where does that come from? We use a lot of music terms in our language, and so we're going to talk about some of these. Music is a language, and I can show you this. What is this?
A lowercase a.
Okay, yeah, a lowercase a, but really, what are letters even? It's a symbol for a sound, right? Because we can do different things to letters, and that means a different sound, right? Well, music's the same way. So approach this with that simple of an understanding that all the stuff I'm going to share with you, you already have a working concept of languages, and that there are symbols used for sounds, and that's all we're talking about. All right, so music notation. The definition I want you to know is what I have here, that it's music notation and all the symbols and things that we're going to discuss is simply telling a player what to play and how to play it. What notes to play and how to play them. In music, we only use 7 letters. All these notes that are on this piano, there's only 7 letters. As they start over. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Matter of fact, the very lowest note on most standard pianos is A. It goes all the way. Now, the very last note is C, but that doesn't make any difference. Point is, we use 7 fundamental pitches, and then we have 12 pitches, but I'll talk about those in a minute. All right. So these 7 letters are really just all the white keys. We have extra notes, and they're the black keys, and we'll talk about how those work in a minute. All right, pitch. Pitch is how high or low a note is. That's the simplest way to discuss it. And there are a lot of pitches on this piano, right? There's a lot of notes in between. Everything vibrates. And for example, A, this piano is tuned to A440. That's a standard worldwide. And at that pitch, that vibrates at 440 cycles per second. But, there is 440.01, 440.02. I mean, there's really truly an infinite number of pitches, if you really get down to it. But this is the standard that is tuned, A440, and the other pitches they all also vibrate at different intervals, at different pitches. How low they are, that's what's known as pitch. And eventually you're going to get to notes that vibrate twice as fast or twice as low, and that's why we reuse the notes, because there is that A, but then the one below it that vibrates at 220 is also A, and the one that vibrates at 110. You follow me? So there's physics involved, and so that's why we just use those same pitches again, because they're the same names, they're just vibrating at different octaves is what we call it. So how do we know where these pitches are? In geometry, a dot, a point in space is just kind of floating out there. But if we can plot it, we know we can find everything else, right? We can find any other point in space, correct? And music is the same way. We use what's called a staff. And this staff is a system of 5 lines and 4 spaces. Each of them represent a pitch. A staff is just that. It's a system of 5 lines and 4 spaces that represents a range of pitches. Now, what range of pitches? Well, that's when we use something called a clef. A clef is, this is the first one I'm going to show you. It's called the treble clef. And it's also known as the G clef because it loops around the line that is the pitch G. So if I know where G is, what comes next? A, because, right, we start over. What comes after A? B, et cetera, right? And what's the note right below it, that space below G? F, good. This is tough stuff, isn't it? Musicians really have to be brilliant, don't they? No, it's pretty simple. And so that's what a clef does. So here is walking that dog. We have the treble clef on top. Again, it's called the G clef because it has a loop around that line that is G. There's also a bass clef. And it's also known as the F clef because the dots are on either side of the line that is F in the bass. And there's a third one that all I want you to know is it's called a C clef. And it has a little notch in the center, and that is around the line that will be the pitch C. So if you look at the treble clef, and by the way, in your car, you got a couple knobs, right? Your treble knob and bass knob. What happens when you turn the treble knob? You don't know? Nobody's ever turned the treble knob? What happens when you turn the bass knob? Nobody's ever adjusted the tone in their car. In your stereo?
This one, it makes the beat of the song hit harder.
When you do, which one?
The bass.
The bass. Okay, why does it do that? What's actually happening?
Doesn't it lower the voices of the...
It doesn't lower anything. Well, it doesn't lower the voices. The recording is the recording. And it's a wide range of pitches, right? All kinds of instruments and voices. But what does the stereo do? I'm sorry?
It brings out the lower range.
Yes. When you turn the bass up, what it does is it raises the amplification of the lower pitches. So you get more of that boom, boom, depending on what kind of music you're playing, right? And what happens when you turn the treble knob? The higher pitches, it raises the high pitches. And they're set at notches. Like the bass is usually around 100 and the treble is usually about, 5 or 10K. And so everything kind of around it is, brought up or down. You can lower it, raise it, or what have you. So what kind of instruments, I was looking at the treble meaning the higher pitches. What range is the treble? Here or here? The first one, right? And which range is the bass? The lower ones, right? So what instruments would read a treble clef? The instruments that play in the range of high pitches, right? Like what? A flute, clarinet, trumpet. Good. Okay, you have the right idea. Violins. And singers, is it a male voice or a female voice? Probably the female voices, right? Though there's some guys who can get up there. All right, and conversely, the bass, the lower instruments, right? The tuba, trombone, baritone, old French horn, bass, that kind of stuff. All right. And the C clef. So who uses the C clef? Well, have you noticed, and I should have a little laser pointer. I'm going to look at bringing one. I have one. I'll get one later. Right now I'll use the cursor. So, did you notice that one there? And that one there? The first line, and by the way, these little lines right here that are extensions of a particular clef, they're called ledger lines, Ledger. You need to know that. They're called ledger lines, and all they do is they extend the clef a little bit. Back in the old days, they used to have, well, I'll explain that in just a moment, 13 lines. But so anyhow, that first line above the bass clef is a C. And the first line below the treble clef is also a C. They happen to be the same note. Again, in the old days, to have the full range of the piano, they had the 10 or the 5 below and the 5 above and the C line in the middle. And you had to read all of that, but that's kind of hard to read. So they split it to make it easier for everybody to read. So the instruments that use the high range, they only have to look at that one clef and the low range the same. But there's, like I mentioned, there's some voices, some people who sing kind of high, guys singing high, and there's some ladies who sing really low, Sarah Vaughan, and a few other artists. And there are some instruments that play in that range where if it's kind of in between, they'll have to use a lot of ledger lines. Like a trombone can go up 5 ledger lines. It can play that high. Clarinets can play like 4 or 5 ledger lines below the staff. And a viola can play like 6 lines below. So there is this C clef that accommodates those instruments and voices that sing in the middle. And what you're actually looking at is that would be middle C, which is the same as this note right there. Right? So you've got middle C, and then the top 2 lines of the bass clef, and the bottom 2 lines of the treble clef, essentially the range we're talking about. Okay? You understand? We're just identifying a range, because that's all a staff does, identify a range. okay, or a clef does. So that's why you have a C clef. So all I want you to know is it's called a C clef. Now one day you might come across some smart aleck that'll tell you, well, no, that's actually an alto clef. Well, yes, it's just good to know. You don't need to memorize just for a test. But this is a movable clef. Fixed right here on the center line, that's called the alto clef. If you move it up one, it's called the tenor clef, or you move it down, the mezzo soprano. Move it up two, it's called the baritone clef. Move it up, move it down two. It's a movable clef, but don't worry about it. It's a C clef. Because all it does is tell you what note is C. Okay? All right. Let's talk more about the staff. In the staff, there are lines. They're separated into segments, into what's called measures or bars. We talk about 12-bar blues. That's what we're talking about. There's all music, and as you play it, is in little segments, and every segment is equal to the other until you change the time, and then we can do that. Those vertical lines are called bar lines. Okay, so at a glance, you can just tell how big that measure is. There happens to be a double bar line at the end. There is such a thing. And so let's talk about note values. I think this will start making more sense how all this comes together. There's a hierarchy of notes. There's a whole note, a half notes, two half notes, just like the English system, right? 2 half gallons equals a gallon, 4 quarts equals a gallon, that kind of thing. So it follows essentially the same thing. And for every, plus there's a minus, for every positive there's a negative, for every sound there's silence. So there's also the corresponding symbols for silence. Okay? Because music is, silence is part of music. When, shut up. Okay? So you do need to know these. And you'll notice in every measure they all equal 4, right? We'll talk about why. So first one equals 4 quarters, half hold, all that kind of stuff, right? We'll talk about that next. So the next thing we're going to see at the beginning of a piece of music is a thing called a time signature. And the time signature is designated by 2 numbers, one stacked on the other. And there's a little code to that. And that code is here in the center. A 2 stands for a half note, a 4 for a quarter note, 8 an eighth note. So the top number tells us how many beats are in a measure. The bottom number tells us what note is going to get the beat. And so what that tells us is there are going to be 4 beats per measure, and the quarter note gets the beat. So it has to equal 4, right? So all that adds up to 4, right? You see the one whole note, or a whole rest, or 2 half notes, right? Or we could change it up, a half note and 2 quarter notes. Or we could go quarter note, 4/8, and another quarter note. But it all equals 4, right? Or we could do some rest, mix them up together. A quarter note, a quarter rest, and a half note. Any combination we want, as long as it equals 4. See that? Really tough stuff, huh? And we can change the time signature. What is this first time signature? 3/4. What does that mean? 3 beats per measure, and what note gets the beat? The quarter note, okay. What about the second time signature? 12/8. What does that mean? 12 beats per measure, and what note gets the beat? The eighth note. Good. You remembered the little code from the previous page? And C. That's shortcut for 4/4 because that is the most common time. C stands for common time. Most things are written in 4. So, why? What's the big deal? What is all that? How's that going to make me sleep better? What do we learn from that? Well, it tells us what kind of style we're going to play in. All right, so I can play in 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? But what if I want to play in 3? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. What kind of music is that? A waltz, exactly. Or how about 12? Bells are ringing, sad, sad news. Oh, what a Christmas, right? That kind of thing. It changes the feel, right? And that's 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So that's what times do for us. Is it tells us what kind of feel we're going to play. Okay? And almost all music is rooted in dance. There's a lot of music rooted in liturgy and the church and sacred music, but most of it stems from dance. So somewhere in there's a step, like the waltz, or this little blues sway, or a polka. We'll talk about those in a bit too. So that's what time does. It tells us how many beats per measure and what note gets the beat, but the big picture, the so what factor, and you'll hear me say that all semester, so what, is it tells us what kind of feel we're going to have in the song. All right, next thing is key. If I don't have any key signature, we're in the key of C. And the key of C is all the white keys. But there are 3 symbols I need you to know. And the first one is called a sharp. Looks like a hashtag. It's not. It's a sharp. You'll notice that the lines are a little off. Okay? And then the second one is called the flat. So what do? Well, a sharp, when you see a note, it raises the pitch to the nearest black key next to it. That's where we start using the black keys. And then a flat does the opposite. So that one happens to be on the line B, and that tells me to play B flat instead. So every time I get to that line and find a note, that tells me to play that note. Happens to be the key of F. I'm not going to teach you the keys. You don't need to know the keys. You just need to know that that's the key of 1 flat. Okay? When you see these things at the beginning of a piece of music, or if there's nothing, it's a key of C. But when you see stacks of these things, that just tells you what key it's in. Okay? The last one is called a natural sign. Because remember, all these lines and spaces represent white keys. So when you see a natural sign, all it does is cancel out whatever sharp or flat is the rule. So the rule is, like when we're in the key of 1 sharp, all through that piece of music until it changes key, every time you play that top note, what's that top note? F, right? Every time you get to an F, instead of playing that, you play this, the sharp. But there might come a part where you're playing the song and they want to change. And so now you'll see a natural. Go back to the natural because we're meant to do something else. The melody has changed. But once you get to the next bar line, the rule goes back into effect. Okay. Make sense? Pretty simple. All a sharp or natural does is cancel out sharp or flat. That's all you need to know. Okay? And so I gave some examples of multiple sharps and flats. There's a whole bunch of them. And again, you don't need to know the keys. It's not important. But when you see a beginning of a piece of music, you'll be able to at least identify that there are Sharps and flats and all those things mean there's just keys. Okay, so articulations. What is articulation? What are those? Anybody know? What does it mean to be articulate? It's another one of those words we use commonly in English. What does that mean?
Just because I'm thinking about it like diction.
It's not diction.
Exaggeration.
I'm sorry?
Exaggeration.
Exaggeration? Well, no, that's an exaggeration, isn't it? Not exactly.
Does it mean like hitting your vowel sounds?
The vowel sound? No, that's enunciation, perhaps.
Hitting everything else.
What is articulation?
It's like
Quite often people will compliment the British, many English people, for being articulate. You know, many people will mean it as a compliment to talk about an eloquent speaker, someone who's very articulate. What does that mean?
precise.
I'm sorry?
Precise.
Precise in what way? You're on the right track.
Isn't it almost like the part where they emphasize a particular part of the word?
It doesn't have to do with the breakdown of the word or, again, diction or syntax and all that. It has to do with word choice. Okay? You probably have noticed, and you'll probably maybe notice now, when you watch a movie, especially those cross-culture movies, you know, about England and the United States as an American over in England or vice versa, and you know how they just talk different and they'll use different words, but it's like that's pretty funny because they're more precise with their description of a feeling or you know an idea. You know, words that we tend to not use. We always use like. We use a lot of metaphors. But you know they'll be a little more direct in their description about things. Anyway, that's being a little more articulate because you have more words at your command. It's not always what you say; it's how you say it, right? When I got married, I told my wife, "I don't know what I did to deserve you." 10 years later, I don't know what I did to deserve you, right? It's not what you say; it's how you say it, right? It's not what I play; it's how I play it. Everybody heard of cumbia before?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now which way sounds more like a cumbia? Or this? Which one sounds more like a cumbia? The second one. Why? I played the exact same notes.
Put more emphasis on a certain note.
Right, I used articulation. There's only 3. There's dozens of them. You know, that go into, just like I showed you at the very beginning, the letter A, and there were all the little things that you could put on it to change how you make the sounds. That's what we're talking about here. Are all these little devices that we'll use to describe how I want you to play these notes. So that one is called an accent. And what does that mean? You just play something a little louder. We use that in our common language. You know, ladies, you go shopping and you buy, you know, a new outfit, and then you got to find something that makes it sparkle, right? An accent. You know, a belt, or maybe the sparkle things on the pockets, or, you know, that kind of stuff. Something that makes it stick out, right? And an accent. The rest of it could be kind of dull, but you got to have something that gives it some flash, some bling, right? That's what an accent does. Then we have this little dot. That's called a staccato mark. And what does staccato mean? Very short. Writers use that, you know, to talk about, I don't know, a war movie or whatever, or a book. You know, the staccato machine gun fire could be heard across the city. Right? And then the last one is called a slur. So, in music, if there's no marking at all, the intent of how it should be performed or played is with a slight distance between notes. I can play it staccato. Use that a lot in cartoon movies, right? The cat, that kind of thing. Beep, 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 beep. But I can kind of connect them and slur them. They kind of connect, kind of blend or blur together a little bit. That's called a slur. So those are the three I want you to know. Okay? Any question about that? Pretty simple, huh? Moving right along. Dynamics. We also tend to talk about people who are dynamic speakers. Right? What do we mean about that?
They have more variety.
Variety. They have points that are subtle, and they have points that are very bold. In music, and borrowing from music, dynamics have to do with volume. That's simple. Volume as in loudness, not capacity. I have a lot of volume, but I'm not always very loud. Okay, so the first I'll show you is on the very far left, actually the second from left, piano. I know you probably say, well, isn't this a piano? Actually, this instrument was named, this is a relatively kind of new instrument. A lot of instruments, what preceded this was the harpsichord, a few other things. And but a harpsichord, it plays only kind of a one volume, it plucks, and it's only got about this much distance for it to pluck. And so it can only play so loud. Then someone came up with a new mechanism of creating hammers, and then you can move it just a little bit, or you can really hit it hard. So it created the ability for dynamics. And so this is literally called the soft loud, because it can play soft and loud. It was a great leap forward in the ability for keyboard instruments. So again, literally it's called the soft loud. Kind of got the piano for short. So the piano, meaning soft, pianissimo, very soft. Loud is forte, very loud is fortissimo. And in the middle we have the mezzo. That's a piano, that's a forte. When we see that word used in other things, meaning kind of in the middle. That's a soprano, one that she's not a real high soprano, she's kind of in the middle. Or maybe the mezzanine at a hotel, it's that area above, before you get to the floors, where the rooms are. Usually have a ballroom there, or maybe the offices or something. So that's it. We good? But also with dynamics, as we got towards the 17th century, or 16th century, 17th century, during Bach's day, people would play songs that either soft or loud. And then they would start playing songs where one passage was soft and the next passage was loud. It's called terrace dynamics. And as we got into past the Renaissance, there was this great idea to be a little more dynamic, to swell things. And the crescendo was a very popular way to do that, to start. In math, we see that all the time, right? What is that called?
More, I don't know the name.
It's called inequality, right? There's something more on one end than the other. And so, if we're going gradually louder, then we have more on as we go, because we read left to right, right? And if we're getting softer, the opposite. But what's missing? What's missing? Where we start and where we end, right? Because take a look at the top part. It goes from piano to mezzo piano back to piano. That's a very different from maybe a piano to a triple forte. Right? One would be very subtle. Whereas the other one, da, 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 right? A very, very huge crescendo. And there's different ways to write it. Normally that's how you write it. You just use a crescendo mark, and when it's within a bar or two. But what about this? What movie is that? Huh? Right. Imagine being a studio musician having to play that. You go, for like 10 minutes, right? Because it takes a while. You see the girl up there, she's swimming along, frolicking in her bikini and all that stuff, and her friends are saying, go, they're making her swim. And you know it's coming, right? Because you hear this. You use a lot of things in films, the music in films that create that kind of tension. But it's going on for a long time. And how do you know he's getting close? It gets louder, right? So how are they going to write that? Well, we use something like this. Start off piano, and these are those notes, boom, 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 that player. And it might go on 50 measures. And it'll say crescendo. And then maybe 10 measures later, we want you to be at that volume. So you can tell it's a very slow crescendo. Draw on a huge crescendo bar. Point is, this is what it looks like. It means the same thing. And a DIM for diminuendo is the opposite. Okay? All right, the backbeat. Let's talk about, actually before we get into the backbeat, I want to talk about subdivision. Subdivision, we can subdivide, in theory, into any number, but generally it's only subdivision of 2 or 3 is what we use in music. We could subdivide into 5, but even if I subdivide it into 4, I have here a simple subdivision of subdividing each beat into 2, right? You see that? You have 4 beats, and on the top you have 8 beats. So 2 of those, I'm subdividing this 1 beat. Oops. Okay, so each beat is subdivided into 2. Now I can subdivide each beat into 3, and that's pretty easy to see here, right? And the numbers are there. This is subdividing into 4, but really it's just subdividing into 2 twice, right? Because I could make, 2 eighth notes and read it back to subdividing into 2, right? I could subdivide into 6, but that's 3 twice. All I want you to know is subdivision, is we're going to talk about 2 and 3. That's all we're going to talk about. Hard to rock and subdividing into 5. We don't do that. It's all 2 and 3. Okay, so what does that do? What does that mean? So what's the so what? What's the so what factor? We're going to hear, and it occurs in every style of music, but for our purposes in rock and roll, we'll hear subdivision of 2. And we can do it in 3, like we did the other one. Right? It has a whole different feel. Or I can do 3 this way. subdivision of 3. You hear that? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Y'all can hear that? Okay. So that's what subdivision adds for us. It gives us more feel, even more feel, specifically how we're going to create feel in the song. But there's one other side benefit to subdivision that I want to demonstrate right now, and y'all going to help me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tap a beat, and then this half of the class, what I want you to do is tap on your armchair or maybe on your hand a subdivision of 2. Okay? Ready? Go. Pretty easy, right? All right, let's try this half of the class. Let's do a subdivision of 3. Here's the beat. Okay, so now we've demonstrated subdivision of 2, subdivision of 3. So how does subdivision help us out practically? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold a tempo here, and I want y'all to play this tempo with me. Just tap your hands with what I'm doing here. Louder. Okay, we're not real together. Let me see if I can help you here. A little better. How about now? See how much closer we came together? Because you could hear the subdivision and calculate better when to play, right? And that's what subdivision does. And that's what generally the drummer's job is to do, is to keep some subdivision. You'll always hear the drummer do a tapping on a cymbal or a hi-hat or something, doing the fastest thing, that subdivision, so everybody can stay together. Next time you listen to your favorite song, listen for the drummer doing either some 8 notes or triplet 16th notes or whatever from the top, so everybody can hear and stay together. Or sometimes it can be implicit. Maybe it's the piano player. You can feel the beat by the subdivision the piano's doing, right? It's 9 o'clock on Saturday, right? You can feel the beat, you can feel that sway because of what the piano player's doing, that subdivision, right? Okay, so that's what subdivision does for us. Now, let's go back and talk about pulse, or rather the backbeat. The backbeat is basically 2 and 4. And it's just the way American popular music is developed, most popular music is developed. The strongest beats are actually beats 1 and 3. And it's where the snare drum plays, is the backbeat. That's generally where we clap. You know? You've probably heard, and this shows a subdivision up there on the top. This is like what a drummer reads. Yes?
I have a class at 12. Can I get going?
Is it already, are we out of time?
It's 11:51.
Oops. Yeah, we're out, yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll post the lecture online and we'll continue Friday.